Okay, we're ready. Let's get into our demo. Joel is going to, again, give us another demonstration, which we appreciate, and this is going to be on making bracelets. Joel?
Yep, I guess it works. When we were at the Waco show last year, the SWAT meeting last summer, one of the vendors had some bracelets that they were displaying. My wife saw those and she says, "Geez, I really like those. Can you make some for me?" And so we contacted the gentleman who makes these, and it's been an interesting project since then. They're wonderful gifts, and basically to start off, if you can turn a pen, you can turn these bracelets. The guy who developed the concept is named Eric Gertz. He's from Colorado, and he has a company that he calls Wildwood Design, and he goes under the name of the Bangle Guy. And he's done a lot of interesting research. He basically has had somebody make these steel metal inserts. He also makes them out of copper, and they're sized at 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, and then he turns a wood ring. These metal inserts come in two parts, and they're CAD designed. And one of the interesting problems that Eric came up with is that the wood needs to be extremely stable, because you have wood that can move sitting on a core of metal that is not going to move. And he is very concerned about wood expansion and contraction and cracking. And his idea is this should be a fine piece of jewelry, and you shouldn't have something that's going to crack and fall apart on you. So he takes very good pains to stabilize the wood. A couple of things. He will either sell these wooden cores, or you can make some on your own, which I've done. This is rosewood, which I cut myself. It's then very important to dry it, and this rosewood, and I had some bloodwood that was sitting out in my garage since the SWAT meeting, so that's been at least 6 months. And I sent it to Eric to stabilize, and when he dried it to stabilize, they became a little bit on the oval side, which you don't want. Luckily, it wasn't too distorted, so I was able to turn it into a ring that worked out okay. So I was able to compensate for that. But if you're going to make your own wooden rings out of wood that you happen to have, you want to dry it in an oven or a microwave. Make sure it's extremely dry first. Eric then takes the wood and puts it in a resin solution. There's a company that makes something called cactus juice. He puts this into a resin, puts a vacuum on it so that the air is sucked out and the resin then will flow into the wood to cause a resin-stabilized wood to decrease the expansion and contraction of the wood. So even if you're using a hardwood and it's pretty dry, it still could expand and contract a bit, and he's done a number of studies. Everything that I'm saying tonight is on his website, bangleguy.com. I do have some handouts. I only made 5 of them because they're like 15 pages long. The 5 of you can have them, but don't worry about it because this is taken off of his website, which you have access to, and you can see them in color, and these copies are just in black and white. And he goes through a step-by-step process, basically saying the same thing that I'm saying tonight. If you're going to make your own cores, you need a drill that's about 2.5 inches in diameter for the inside core and about 3.5 inches in diameter for the outside core. And it's a little bit of a tedious process. You have to clamp the wood down, cut the outside ring first, and then with the wood that you've made, the outside ring that's left over, if you cut that on a bandsaw and cut out a little piece, you can then squeeze that together onto the ring to create a vise so you can stabilize it enough so you can then cut the inside of the circle and cut out the inside circle portion so that you can then make this ring. If you really got into production, then you could get one of these vacuum containers and stabilize it yourself. Or what I've done with some of these is send it to Eric and he stabilized it for me. They're not all that expensive to begin with, and Eric has a lot of wood that's already pre-stabilized, and it's probably a whole lot easier just to order that from him. Just to go over general prices, just so you have an idea, this core costs approximately $25. And the wood costs approximately $10, $9, $10, depending on what kind of wood and what size. So you're talking about $35 worth of material for one ring. I generally will sell them for between $60 and $70, depending on what I have into them. So once you have the ring present, you then need to size it. The different sizes are actually from the size of your hand. And if you hold your thumb and small finger together and then put a tape measure around the fat part of your hand and measure that in inches, that's where the 7, 7.5, 8, or 8.5 comes in. Just to give you a perspective, my wife was fairly thin wrist, takes a 7.5, and I found majority of women have that. If you're a little bit on the heavy side, then you may need an 8. If you have arthritis in your hands, you may need an 8.5. If you're much smaller, then the 7 would probably do. So the average woman, again, needs about a 7.5 and go from there. You then have to decide what size ring you're going to make, whether it's going to be a 7, 7.5, or 8, and then cut the inside diameter to that size. Now, what I found is that when you're cutting the inside diameter, of course, you don't want to put your cutting tool up against the inside of the chuck. So what I made is a spacer. You can make it out of wood. You can actually just get 2 pieces of wood and put it there and push your wood core onto that and then remove those pieces so you have a little bit of a space. You want to bring the wood out from the chuck a little bit more than halfway, so you can then cut the inside diameter a little bit more than halfway and then take it off and reverse it and cut it the rest of the way so, so both sides are the same. So you cut 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way on one side, take it off, turn it around, and cut the other way. So you do need a spacer to bring it out from your chuck so you have enough space to do that without putting your cutting tool against that. Now, I've got some PVC rings that worked out very well. This is just a 3-inch in diameter piece of PVC pipe that I cut. This one is a little bit thinner. The one I have on here is a little bit thicker. And again, like I said, you can make the spacer out of wood if you want, and this is just a 1/4-inch piece of plywood, just scrap. Once you cut the inside diameter and get that shaped, you then need to cut the width of the wood piece so that it will fit inside this ring. Again, you're going to get the ring and put it together like this. This is one that I've turned, but I haven't glued yet. So this is cut to the proper diameter on the inside and the proper width. You then put one metal core in here and the other metal core in here. To keep this from, again, cracking, and Eric is very concerned about that, he's also found that there's a glue, liquid nails, that does not dry as hard as epoxy or as a CA glue. It has a little bit of flexibility to that. Let's see, there we go. So that this liquid nails is the glue that he suggests using. I'll put a little bit of glue on the inside of the piece of wood core. Then I'll put it on the outside of both rings. Then slide the rings together over here, and then put them in a clamp to clamp it tight and let it sit 12 hours or overnight until it's secure, and then do the final shaping. Again, he suggests from the studies that he's done that the wood move a little bit. This one is all set up and is ready to glue, and I'll go ahead and pass this out so you can just see how that fits. Here's another one. We'll put this over here. This one is already glued, so you can see how that one fits. So you want a little bit of leeway. You don't want it a real tight fit. You want a little bit of looseness so there's some play, and so it sort of floats on the glue itself.
So you turn the outside after it's glued on?
After it's glued, then you turn the outside. Then you'll have a nice stable piece, and I can do that with one of these pieces that we're passing around. So you can then go ahead and turn that. And the shape, of course, is entirely up to you. This one is a low profile, which I originally thought fit my taste. But my wife and a lot of the other ladies that I've sold these to seem to prefer wood that's thicker. They like the thicker profile so you can see more wood. And that, of course, is entirely your own preference. Some of the wood, I've then taken a Dremel tool and scratched it or etched it and put in some blue-colored powder. It's not really turquoise. And put in some inlay. My sister wanted one in copper, and so I was able to find a copper powder and put that in with just some CA glue. Put some glue in the groove that I've cut. Put the copper powder in. Put a little bit of CA glue on top of that, and then go ahead and sand it down and smooth it, and it makes a very nice inlay. And you do this sort of randomly so that it looks like it's a natural, which I say, not inlay, but yeah, there we go, a natural inclusion of stone or metal or color into the wood itself. So I'll just pass these around, and you can look at them as we're talking. A couple there, I guess, and a couple over here. I ended up making holiday gifts for all the women in my family, giving them out all these, and they seem to be appreciated. So what I'm going to do, I've partially, just to make things go a little bit faster for the demo, I've already turned one side of this core. I'll go ahead and turn and try to size this side of the core. And like doing a lot of fittings in wood, you have to cut it, test it, cut more, test it, cut more, and test it. And obviously you don't want to overdo it, so you want to take it in small bites. It is important to wear your safety gear as you're expanding this chuck on the inside. You can put too much pressure and split it. Sometimes the split won't occur until you're actually turning it, and then of course it's going to fly apart. So it is important to wear a safety mask so that it doesn't hurt you if there should be a failure. And you can use various tools. I found that this easy cutter with the carbide cutter works real well. You can also use a Badan or any other kind of a tool to go straight in as if you're cutting the sides of a straight box. And again, when you're using your tool in this fashion, you should have it a little bit above center, so that instead of cutting at center, you want to cut it up here in the upper third, sort of at the maybe 10 o'clock position, so that the wood is coming down onto the cutting surface. And try and keep your tool as square as possible and just take small bites. Now what I'm actually doing as I'm cutting is I'm looking down here at this lower corner. I can't see the actual ends of the tool, and I of course don't want to put it into my chuck. So as I'm doing this, once I get it started, I then look at this opposite corner, and you can see where the dust and where the groove changes, so you can follow it by looking indirectly at where you're cutting instead of directly at it, and try and keep your head tilted like this. Now, as I said, I've already cut the other side just to make things a little bit easier. Let's just match this up. It fits right in there. And I had the other side to act as a guide, so I was more careful cutting that first side. So now I have both sides cut through, and the core will fit in, or the metal core will fit into both sides. And now I need to cut the width so that the width will be exactly equal or slightly less than the rings when they're closed.
Can you vary the width of that at all?
You can't vary the width of this. I think he does sell it in different width sizes. So it just depends on the core, the metal core that you happen to have. But you really can't vary the width. I tried when I made one a little bit too loose, a little bit too sloppy. I tried putting it on my sanding belt and tried it, but there is a lip in here that the two fit into. So even if you cut the edge shorter, the lip is still going to limit the amount that you can squeeze it together. So if you take off too much of the width, it may be a problem. You may not be able to use it.
Stainless steel?
Yes, this is stainless. And my wife and the other women that I've sold these to tell me they're very comfortable. And again, you can use this type of a spacer or this type of a wooden spacer here. Just put that on here, tighten it up, pull that out, and that way it will be symmetrical and still away from the chuck itself, so you have a little bit of space. Right here, it's not very important because you're going to be cutting the width. I'm not going to be going down into the chuck.
What is the actual inside diameter in inches?
Let me just put this on here. Yep. Just a little bit of gentle finger pressure so you don't overdo it. The inside diameter is about 0.60 inches from collar to collar.
How about this diameter?
The diameter itself, let's see, that's the inside diameter is 2.5 inches. Okay, 2.5 across.
That would be a size.
This is for a size 7.5. To give you an idea, let's see, it's 2.45 for the 7.5, 2.54 for the 8, and 2.66 for the 8.5. Okay? So you don't really need the exact measurements, you just need to fit it for the size that you're doing. So you use calipers, but you don't even really have to, this is an electronic one, but you don't even have to turn it on. You just size it, slide it back and forth, size it for what you need, and then cut it to fit. So the actual number isn't important. Okay.
Do you buy the wood from him, or is it pre-cut, or you have to cut the shape to fit?
Both. When I first started, I bought it from Eric, and then when I was at the Waco meeting, I bought some wood that I thought would make some pretty bracelets. So I wanted to try making it on my own. So then you have to go out and buy a carbide hole saw that's 2.5 inches, another carbide hole saw that's 3.5 inches, and then try and get it stabilized. And so it might be a pain, and so it's a whole lot easier just to buy it from Eric, and it's $10, give or take some.
When you buy from him, is his already fit?
No. Yeah, this is the rough core here that you just saw.
Okay.
Okay, this is from Eric. Okay, and he cuts it so that it would fit like a size 7, which is the smallest core, and then you can make the hole whatever size you want for whatever. And he's pretty generous also in giving you a lot of width as well as thickness. Okay, and one bracelet he sent me, I thought I could almost make 2, but not quite. So yeah, he's fairly generous in the wood that he gives, and he's got a large selection of wood on his website, and he's a nice guy to talk to.
The website again was?
Bangleguy.com. I have a bunch of cards up here that please feel free to use and have fun making these things. So now what I need to do is to.
Instead of having a hole saw, you could turn them on the lathe.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, if you got a flat piece of wood, you could just go ahead and turn on the lathe as long as you got the right diameter. And you probably need to have a wood backing. So if you put a wood backing on it and then either glued it, double sticky tape to it, or found some sort of a mechanism to hold it, and then turned it on the lathe if you wanted to. And so let me go ahead and just show you how I size that. Okay, so this is the width of the core, and what I'm going to do now is just put this up against my spacer, I'm going to make like a little scratch mark. And let me see. Yeah, when I turn it on, I can see it. And what I'll do to make it easier for you to see is put a pencil mark on it. So that's about the width that we'll need. So I'm going to cut down almost to my pencil line and try not to go over it. Now there are various ways, again, that you could cut this. One is with John Horn's favorite instrument, the skew. And with the skew, you use the long point. You want to raise up your tool rest, start it up high, take it into the wood, and then gradually down. And then once it's down in this position, I just go straight forward. And this is really easy to do. And let's see, there it is. And again, this is the easy tool. You can use that as well. Just take your time, take small bites. Now what I found works better and more exact is using some sandpaper for the final sizing. Put this together. And it comes together and there's just a slight space. I can put my fingernail in there and feel it. When these two metal cores come together, you shouldn't even be able to put your fingernail in. And so that's the way that I like it. And now the next step is just to sand it. At this point, you really don't need the spacer if you want, because you're not going to be coming anywhere near that chuck.
How many of those do you break before you learn the pressure on that chuck?
A few. And of course, it obviously depends on the particular wood. Bloodwood, which is very pretty, seems to have a definite grain to it, and I split more of those than most other woods. So here I'll just use a very coarse piece of sandpaper. I don't want to make a whole lot of dust. And let's see, that's about a 60 grit. I'm going to go up to a 240 just for purposes of demonstration. And don't need that any longer, I don't believe. And I find it's easier to get a smooth surface now than when I put it together and clamp it. So I try to sand both faces a little bit before I actually do the clamping. And that's just about right. Maybe slightly tight, but so that's the core. And now I'll glue that. I'll use the glue that we're talking about down here, the liquid nails. And I'll put, I'm going to clean off the wood first. I use just alcohol to do that. You want to clean off the wood. So I just get alcohol and wipe the inside. I'll use some alcohol to get the metal core nice and clean. and that'll put just a little bit of glue on both surfaces, put the two together, turn them a little bit, just as if you're gluing plastic pipe together, and then I'll put it in a clamp and just let it set overnight before I'm ready to turn it.
Isopropyl alcohol.
Well, I have a gallon can of methyl alcohol that I bought at Lowe's, so I have different solvents at home.
Have you ever had any squeeze out?
Yeah, there's a little bit of squeeze out, and again, the alcohol or other solvent will help take care of that, and that cleans it up very nicely. Yes?
What kind of finish are you using?
Lately, I've been using a poly finish for almost everything. I first go ahead and put a base coat of shellac, which seals it, brings out the grain. It soaks into the wood a little bit. It dries very quickly. Shellac is called a universal sealer. You can put almost anything you want over that. So I'll only sand these to about 300 or 320, 340. Then I'll go ahead and put the shellac on it. Within 30 to 60 minutes, the shellac is dry. I'll use 400 grade on that to take off any dust nibs or any wood fibers that are elevated. It's quite smooth then. And then I'll go ahead and put coats of poly. I clean off the wood first with alcohol because that's the solvent for the shellac. After the shellac dries and I sand it, I then wipe it down with some water because that's the solvent for the poly. It's a water-based Minwax poly. And then I just use poly finish, put on about 3 coats of that, do maybe a 600 sanding, or using some of the fiber that mesh cloth material that 3M makes. It comes in green and gray and maroon. And then put another 2 or 3 coats on. And then once that's completely dry, I'll take it over and to my buffing wheel and I'll buff it.
Joel, at what point in time do you turn the outside to add a shape to it?
I do that after the gluing. I let it sit overnight, and then I'll go ahead and turn that. And let's see, I think one of the pieces that we passed around that has some bloodwood in it, I think is ready to be turned, so I can go ahead and just turn that to shape. I'm not sure where that piece is. One that's it's rough. Yeah, that'll work. I'm sorry? I don't worry about it. I'm going to be sanding it anyway, and that comes off. You can use your cutting tools and put it right on the metal. It doesn't hurt the metal, and it doesn't seem to hurt your tools very much particularly, and it'll take it off, and it really doesn't produce a problem. You can take it, you can sand right down onto the finish. No, the metal is, yeah, really hard. I mean, I use sandpaper on the metal all the time, and it doesn't leave grooves in it. I wanted to know what happens with the poly when it's on the metal. I'm sorry? Right, no, you don't have to cut the stainless. Yeah, let's see. And now at this point, just turn it to whatever shape you want. Down a little bit. And then to start rounding it over once I get it flat, smooth. Tom, can you able to sew that? I don't know. I'm going to take this right down to the metal. My wife hates it when I do this. So I'll start about halfway and start tapering it. And here I'll do a little scraping. See them right there on the metal. And I'll just work it back and forth until I have the shape that I want. If I'm going to be doing that inlay, so if I'm going to be doing the inlay, I'll take it to the rough shape that I want, and then I just use a Dremel tool and a cutter bit, and just make some etches in it. Try and make them a little bit irregular so it seems to be natural. You don't want an absolute straight line. And then again, I'll use some CA glue and some filler, and then I'll put it back on the lathe and either use tools or just sandpaper, and smooth it out so it'll get down to the things that you see. I did find that some of the filler I picked up some colored sand. Don't do that. The sand is terrible on your cutting tools. It looks pretty, but it's ruined the edge of a couple of tools, and I really had to start grinding them back. So use something that's a whole lot softer than colored sand. It's just really too harsh on your tools.
This is synthetic sand is not hard on it.
Right. Yeah, this was apparently not synthetic, and it looked pretty, and it looked like it was turquoise, but I'll tell you, it really wreaked havoc on my tools. So.
I've done that before. I ended up making a tool using metal cutting carbide bits meant for a metal lathe.
Mm-hmm.
Put them into, and they actually fit into a piece of pipe, like a square pipe, and that works pretty good on the sand.
Well, you can see that my carbide tip is no longer as straight and smooth as it used to be. Oh, okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's hard on the carbide too. So yeah, I'm not going to use that anymore. And any questions that you have?
What did you say you sold those for?
Between $60 and $70 usually, depending on what it costs me. I figure I usually double what my price is.
Where do you get the glue?
This at Lowe's. Yep, just pick it up at Lowe's.
Have you tried just two-stage epoxy?
I've not. I've just used what Eric said works. He likes the idea that this glue has a little bit of a give to it. So just in case there is still some wood movement after you've dried it, after you've stabilized it, he just adds that little extra comfort zone by having a glue that has just some give, apparently. Nothing that I've ever noticed that it gives. It's locked in there pretty tight. I certainly can't feel it giving. But he says he's tested it, and it has some small flexibility for expansion and contraction. Yeah, Tom?
As the glue guy, I will say that the liquid nails is a material that will allow for the expansion. Most of the epoxies that are out there that you get are very rigid. They have very, very low peel strength, which means they're not flexible at all. So you could run into some problems, whereas this has a much higher peel strength, which indicates it's much, much more flexible.
And we have a gift for someone here tonight. I think we have a raffle. So we can put this in with our gifts or with a raffle. This is something from Eric that he sent it for the club. It's got a copper core. He has a resin stabilized wood insert that's very attractive, and also a tube of the glue. So he's put together a nice little kit, plus a gift box. So we'll put this out on the table, and this can be raffled off tonight. Any other questions?
Again, what was your finish with?
I use a poly, but you can use a CA glue. Anything you coat on pens. So whatever you would like to use for your pens, you can use on these bracelets. Obviously, you just want something that's going to last and be resistant. And I've been very happy with the poly finish. Thank you.